Sean Payton has done it again. The Denver Broncos have stolen a talented wide receiver from the New Orleans Saints. What will this player bring into the mix if he steps foot on the active roster? We'll break that down much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen every single day. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe or follow down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. This morning's episode is a little bit of a bonus episode because the Broncos are making some moves a little bit here as they prepare for the Los Angeles Chargers. We'll break down some of the several personnel decisions that they made on Tuesday before Wednesday's practice, including bringing back a familiar face on the offensive line. But more importantly, the biggest news of the day, Denver going out there, obviously Sean Payton, maybe even Cody Roark a little bit, the VP of player personnel, going out there and stealing a talented wide receiver from the New Orleans Saints. Sayre, let's open it up. A.T. Perry, some people are trying to figure out, I know on social media, you and I put tweets out respectively, and I got a lot of questions. Who is A.T. Perry? What does he bring to the table? This is an exciting young player because I've even seen a couple of people throw out like, hey, Denver should try to trade for him. Well, you don't need to trade for him because you can steal him off of the practice squad. Denver did just that on Tuesday evening.
We know there's two things that Sean Payton loves more than just about anything, don't we, Cody? I mean, he loves big, tall receivers, and he loves former New Orleans Saints, and A.T. Perry just happens to fit both of these categories, right? So a 6'5" receiver scored roughly a 9.6 on the RAS scale. He's obviously got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the explosiveness, and he put that to good use as a rookie with the New Orleans Saints last year, where he caught just 12 passes, but 4 of them went for touchdowns, averaged over 20 yards per reception in his rookie season. So he's got big playability. We saw a little bit of that in the preseason as well, although I did see him kind of having to go work back towards the ball on a number of throws because they were underthrown balls towards his direction, dealing with a bit of the injury bug as well, Cody. But I think ultimately, when we talked about the wide receiver position for this team going into training camp, going into this season, we were excited about the depth. Unfortunately, not everything has played out the way that we had hoped, like with guys like Marvin Mims. It's been a little bit slow going for Troy Franklin, even Devon Vele as well, who's been inactive since week 1. And so now you get another big body receiver out there with athleticism that you're not only is Cody Roark, who used to be the VP of scouting in New Orleans. Now he's with the Broncos in their front office. So he knows him well, but so does Pete Carmichael, who's a senior assistant on Denver's offensive staff, who was the offensive coordinator last year that saw those 4 touchdown catches amidst his only 12 receptions on the year. So we'll see if this guy can get up to speed quickly in the new offense.
Yeah, and look, of those 12 catches that he had, 10 of them were chain movers, first down. That's something the Broncos could use absolutely more of here inside this offense, but also like putting it in perspective. Okay, Denver's active roster right now. You got Cortland Sutton, you got Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Lil Jordan Humphrey. You have a lot of receivers right now on your active group. Granted, you can elevate him from the practice squad to game day roster. Who's going to be inactive from that point? I mean, I think Lil Jordan Humphrey has definitely come on a little bit, an underrated role the last couple of weeks. So what is the vision here for A.T. Perry? The Broncos are going to practice here, obviously, this afternoon in Denver. Maybe we'll get a little bit of insight here from Sean Payton at his press conference a little bit later on this afternoon, what the plan is, what the vision is for a guy like A.T. Perry. You know, I asked our good friend Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast, what type of player they're getting from A.T. Perry. And he said this, he said, A.T. is a really talented player that works incredibly hard. They didn't have a role for him in the new offense here in New Orleans, which relies on a different playing style. He's a talented jump ball receiver with deceptive speed. I'd expect he can play a Tim Patrick-like role, but definitely shouldn't be limited to a one type of pass catcher archetype. So I think really opening things up a little bit is, okay, hey, like right now you got him on the practice squad. You have Caden Davis. You have Michael Bandy on the practice squad. and you have another receiver, David Sills the fifth. So you have all these guys right now on the practice squad. And granted, we're going to talk about some of the roster moves Denver made to the practice squad specifically on Tuesday. But it's like, okay, hey, why are you stockpiling, this player? Or is it a scenario here because now after the Chargers, you go on a Thursday Night Football, you're going to play the New Orleans Saints, which we now know Derek Carr will not play in this matchup next Thursday when Denver travels to New Orleans. Or is this just more so, hey, I'm trying to get intel on the Saints on short turnaround? It could be either option, but I think when you look at A.T. Perry, the type of player that he is a talented player. I think he does belong on the roster, on the practice squad, versus just being an intel informant here for Sean Payton.
Yeah, I think this is a classic case of you found a guy that maybe you had a draftable grade on last year. The ink is still drying on the scouting report. And obviously Cody Roark was part of drafting him in New Orleans. So this is not the first time either that the Broncos, they poached, I think Jordan Jackson was a 2022 sixth round pick from the New Orleans Saints. So you bring in guys that you probably had a draftable grade on this player. And look, I was looking around the NFL draft, archives from 2023. Cody, Lance Zierlein of NFL.com had a third round grade on A.T. Perry. There was a lot of people that were shocked to see him available even into day 3 of the draft, much less he lasted to the 6th round, where the Saints were obviously surprised to see him there because they traded up to get him at pick number 195 overall. So it's not to say, oh man, this is like a former or a 2023 first or second round pick getting cut, but every team has different rankings for all these different players. And I guarantee you the Broncos had a decent grade on this guy because from the sounds of it, after the Saints cut him and he cleared waivers, now that the Broncos have brought him to the practice squad, to me, it kind of sounds like they want to get him up to speed as quickly as possible, not necessarily just to say, hey, let's stash this guy. I would be willing to bet A.T. Perry had a number of offers from other teams after he was cut because, like I said, the ink is still drying on the scouting report from last year. I would be willing to bet that the Broncos have some sort of agreement in place with him to get him on the field sooner than later, to get him opportunities out there because, look, there's competition for these players. You make promises to these guys when you're going to sign them, and Sean Payton is one of those dudes in the NFL that makes good on those promises, whether it takes a month, whether it takes a week, whether it takes a year. He makes good on those promises, and so it may be a process here, but I wouldn't be surprised if this guy is activated sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to find out here very shortly. Maybe not this week against the Chargers, but maybe against his former team next week, the New Orleans Saints. And we'll see if there's some more roster shuffling here, specifically even at the wide receiver position as things progress forward. Or could Denver maybe phase out the receiving tight end as part of their offense and just go heavy receivers? Certainly a possibility. But that wasn't the only move the Broncos made on Tuesday from a roster standpoint. There was a lot of shuffling as it pertained to the practice squad, even including bringing back a former face on the offensive line position with some of the injuries right now to Alex Palczewski and Luke Wattenberg. We'll break that down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Hillsdale College, and time is our most precious commodity. So don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? I think always learning something new or refreshing what you have learned before is always a great step to take, especially as we get glued to technology more and more. Well, you can use that technology to good use because our friends over there at Hillsdale College, our sponsor, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and a handful of others. Over 40 free courses that you can take if you want to continue learning something, you want to expand. Or, hey, if you learned it back when you went to school, but you forgot certain things, well, now you can go through because they have lectures, they have quizzes, they have discussions. Or if you just want to stay for the lectures, you can do just that. But it's free education, courtesy of our friends over there at Hillsdale College. All of Hillsdale's courses, they're self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or if you can, you should enjoy the lectures like I mentioned. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks, and Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot up to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And also, PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action, where you could join over 10 million users and sign up today. They also invented the flex play, which means that you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect, and you can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
A couple of familiar faces have returned to the Denver Broncos practice squad, as well as a number of other roster moves in the flurry. That was a busy Tuesday afternoon for the Denver Broncos, who are back on the practice field on Wednesday. And you know that your boys, Cody and Sayre, we're going to be here for you to break down every roster move, whether it's the active 53-man roster or if it's the practice squad or whatever it may be. But Broncos Country, we got to say thank you to every single one of you for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And let us know your thoughts on these moves, because a lot of people in Broncos Country very excited about A.T. Perry being brought in. And I think, Cody, I was surprised to see a lot of people very pleased that Cam Fleming was brought back to the practice squad. Remember, this move was very controversial. I was kind of, my first year on the show when Cam was competing for a roster spot back in 2021. And we're like, why the heck is this guy on the team? He actually ended up playing a pretty valuable role for the Broncos, playing right tackle, playing left tackle. Now that there's injuries at the position, they've brought him back for a little bit of insurance.
Yeah, and look, going back to 2022, after Garrett Bowles suffered his injury, he ended up moving to left tackle and started 15 games for them. I think I think he played in 15 games, started 10 of them, if I'm not mistaken, from that juncture there. That was, I think he was one of those players that wasn't great all the time, but he wasn't bad enough to, where you're like, hey, I'm really concerned about this. Like, I think he surpassed our expectations when that happened. But you and I talked about it earlier this week on the show that, hey, like, we already know about the injury to Alex Palczewski. Well, keep note that the Broncos a few weeks ago actually worked out a group of offensive tackles. Cam Fleming was included. We said, hey, keep an eye on that. Now that move has come to fruition. Cam Fleming signing to the practice squad. And look, right now, we don't have any update just yet. The Broncos are set to practice here in a couple hours at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit. And the one thing we're going to be keeping our eye on is, hey, what is the latest status on Alex Palczewski, Luke Wattenberg? Like, these are things that we're monitoring here, because Palczewski has the high ankle sprain. Luke Wattenberg, I don't think we have an official designation just yet, but the injury report will release later on in the afternoon on Wednesday, give us some idea going forward. But they also signed Dieter Eiselen to the practice squad as well, an offensive center. I don't know much about him at this point, Sayre, but the fact that they're adding a center right now to the practice squad, Alex Forsyth played, it tells me that maybe there is an expectation that Luke Wattenberg and Palczewski will miss some time here as Denver gets ready to prepare for Khalil Mack, potentially Joey Bosa in the Los Angeles Chargers pass rush.
Yeah, it's a lot to deal with all at once here. We know Mike McGlinchey eligible to come back in the next game, which is a short turnaround for the Broncos, but we don't know that he's for sure going to be back, as knee injuries, especially for big guys, can be a little tricky. So it's nice to have the added depth. Sounds like the center they added to the practice squad has been in the league since around 2020 and has played in a handful of games. Not really somebody that I don't think they're going to want out there right away, to be starting or anything like that. But you have Alex Forsyth, who's going to get an opportunity here, and he was competing for the starting job anyway. So kind of an exciting chance for him to go out there and show what he can do. But of course, when your depth is tested, I know Sean Payton said they really like the depth that they have there. It's going to be heavily tested, of course, as you get Khalil Mack and all these guys. The Chargers have a couple of really good rushers out there. Tui Pulotu, I feel like I say his name wrong every single time, but he's a young player that's emerging really good off the edge for them. So I like this situation, though, for the Broncos to be able to get a look at some of these guys, Cody. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to have your depth be tested early so that you know, okay, when these guys come back, we know that these guys can play if need be.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You want your starters to be able to play, but also you like to see the other guys get opportunities and show what they can do because, Alex Palczewski, he proved in a short amount of time, maybe he could be a viable starter at some point if he can stay on the field. So I really don't mind necessarily when you have good depth at positions that you get a chance to see guys, just like we've seen with Justin Sternad as well at the linebacker position. Like, the initial shock of Alex Singleton going down, it really sucks. But then Sternad comes in, he does a really great job and maybe proves that, okay, maybe we can actually, work with something here. So it's not always the worst thing in the world when injuries do happen. Although, there's certain players that are, you don't ever want to see them go down, but the Broncos do have some nice depth, and it's a testament to maybe one of the rosters that was considered the worst in the league at this offseason, now having its depth tested and proven in the last handful of weeks.
I think it just goes to show sometimes people look at like names on a roster. Oh, there's not a lot of star power. And they're like, okay, bad roster. That's just people that don't know ball. Like, just watch the tape, watch the film. I think we got a good indication of Denver's depth a little bit inside the preseason. And of course, there's obviously some new faces that weren't on this team in training camp, that weren't on this team, obviously, during the preseason stretch. But I think that it's a testament to Cody Roark, George Payton, Sean Payton, this collective vision between them and obviously the personnel department that, hey, like, we are trying to build this roster. And look, so much of what we talked about in terms of a rebuild, okay, Denver's got some long-term pieces in place. You have a rookie quarterback now that you're going to have for at least the next 4 or 5 years, hopefully longer if he continues to play well and obviously grows into his role, and there's stability within the franchise. But then it's like, okay, you're hitting on undrafted guys like Jaquan McMillan. You get late round guys like Jonathan Cooper, which, granted, look, understandably so. That was when Vic Fangio was the head coach, but George Payton was here for that. Like, you're getting contributions from a lot of guys. You mentioned Alex Palczewski, Justin Sternad. Okay, you're bringing in Cody Barton, who is, really a rental in free agency. And you're saying, hey, like, this is a low risk, potential high reward move because this guy's paying off. You go out and you get Malcolm Roach. Like, Denver has done a really good job, I think, building this roster, and it's much better than I think a lot of people were giving it credit for. And it's nice to see that kind of playing out a little bit early on here. Granted, it's better to be, in the Broncos situation right now than the Tennessee Titans. So I think we'll take that anytime, any day of the week. Only real ones know what we're talking about right here on Lockdown Broncos. But with that said, also, there are some other moves there to free up some of those spaces there. Caden Davis brought back to the practice squad. Will Sherman suffered an injury. He's on the practice squad injury list right now. And they've released Quentin Newsome and running back Savon Ahmed, who they had just signed last week, former Miami Dolphins running back. They released those 3 players. I'm still trying to figure out how things are going to play out here for Denver in the next couple of weeks when, okay, hey, Audric Estime is going to return. Mike McGlinchey could return. Like, what are the personnel moves that Denver's going to do? Like, if there are no other names going on IR, well, who's being released to make space for the guys returning from injury? Even Baron Browning. Like, Baron Browning's been on the side field as well, Sayre. So it's like, I don't know how Denver's going to do it. I'm very curious to see what their plan is going forward. It makes things very interesting. And obviously, we'll break it all down here, Lockdown Broncos. But with that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up this bonus episode of the show here today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode of the show because Sayre Bedinger is going to sit down with the guys, Locked On Chargers. They're going to break down and preview Sunday's matchup at home. Denver has a chance to start off an AFC West divisional play 2-0. The Chargers come to town. Sayre's going to break it all down with the best. It's exactly what he does on Crossover Thursdays. You're going to get that on tomorrow's episode of the show.